It was the summer of 1985, and a young woman named Deborah Jackson was walking home late at night in South Los Angeles. She didn't know she was being watched. As she turned the corner, she was suddenly confronted, dragged into a car, and shot. Her body was later found in an alley, discarded like trash. Deborah was just the first known victim in what would become one of the longest killing sprees in American history, but it would take years for the city to realize a serial killer was lurking in the shadows. Throughout the late 1980s, a series of brutal murders rocked the streets of South Los Angeles. The victims were all young, vulnerable women, mostly African American, who were found shot, strangled, or brutally assaulted. Many of their bodies were dumped in alleyways and vacant lots. The killer targeted those who were often overlooked: women struggling with addiction, homelessness, or simply trying to get by. The community was terrified, but the police were slow to connect the dots. These weren't just random crimes, they were the work of a calculating killer picking off victims one by one. By 1988, the murders had stopped as suddenly as they began, and the case went cold. But in 2002, the nightmare began again. The killer returned with the same violent methods, targeting women in the same neighborhoods, leaving their bodies in the same horrific fashion. Despite the killer's distinct pattern, the police struggled to catch him, and fear once again gripped the community. Residents felt abandoned, believing the police weren't doing enough to find the person responsible for the mounting deaths. Investigators dubbed the unknown killer the Grim Sleeper because of his long, unexplained break between the series of murders. But despite extensive DNA evidence, leads remained scarce. Over the years, activists and families of the victims pushed for answers, holding vigils and demanding more resources for the investigation. Still, the killer remained elusive, hiding in plain sight. The breakthrough finally came in 2010, when police used a controversial technique called familial DNA testing, which allowed them to find a match that was close, but not exact. They traced the DNA to a relative of the killer, leading them to a man who had lived in the same neighborhoods as the victims for decades, right under everyone's noses. His name was Lonnie Franklin Jr., a former garbage collector and mechanic who was known in his community as a friendly and helpful neighbor. But behind closed doors, Franklin was a predator who had terrorized women for years. When police searched Franklin's home, they found a disturbing collection of evidence: hundreds of photographs of women, many of whom appeared unconscious or dead, and numerous personal items belonging to the victims. DNA from several murder scenes matched Franklin, finally ending a decades-long mystery. Franklin was charged with the murders of 10 women, but investigators believe he may have killed many more. In 2016, Lonnie Franklin Jr. was convicted of 10 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. He was sentenced to death, but the true number of his victims remains unknown. Franklin died on death row in 2020, taking many of his secrets with him.